Emma's knees buckled at Salvation Ridge's gate. 3 days walking from Copper Creek, the baby silent against her chest, the carpet bag splitting its seams, dust and desperation. Sheriff Carter heard the whispers before he saw her. "Vagrant woman," Deputy Hutchins said. "Got a child." She stood in the lamplight like a ghost made flesh, wedding ring worn smooth, no husband in sight. Her eyes held the same fear he'd seen in his wife's before the fever took her. "We have nowhere left," she whispered. Carter had buried his family 3 winters past. The house behind the jail held only silence now. He studied the infant's pale face, the mother's trembling hands. "The child needs warmth tonight," he said gruffly. Emma hesitated. Trust had betrayed her before. "Just tonight," Carter added, though he knew better. Lost souls recognized each other in the darkness. She followed him through empty streets, toward shelter, toward something neither could name. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Carter led them through the back alleys of Salvation Ridge, avoiding Main Street's prying eyes. The October moon cast long shadows between buildings, and Emma clutched Sarah closer with each creak of wood or distant laugh from the saloon. His boots struck the boardwalk with measured authority, a sound she'd learned to recognize in the weeks ahead. "Not much further," he said without turning, his voice low enough that she had to strain to hear. The house sat behind the jailhouse, separated by a narrow yard and a gate that complained when opened. A 2-story frame structure with peeling white paint. It looked abandoned even with lamplight glowing in one window. Carter pushed open the front door, unlocked. Emma noticed and gestured her inside. The smell hit first leather and tobacco and the staleness of disuse. A single plate sat on the kitchen table beside 1 cup, 1 fork, 1 knife. Dust particles danced in the kerosene lamp's glow, settling on surfaces that hadn't seen a cleaning cloth in months. The parlor held good furniture gone neglected, a horsehair settee, 2 ladder-back chairs, a braided rug whose colors had dulled beneath a film of grime. "You can take the main bedroom," Carter said, already moving toward the stairs. "Upstairs, first door." "We couldn't," Emma began. "You will." He paused at the banister. "The child needs a proper bed." Emma followed him up the narrow stairs, each step groaning beneath their weight. The bedroom door opened to reveal a 4-poster bed with a quilt folded at its foot, a cherry wood dresser, and a washstand with china basin and pitcher. Everything waiting, as if the room's occupant had simply stepped out. "There's a smaller room across the hall," Carter said. "Could work for the baby," while he fetched linens from a hall closet. Emma set Sarah on the bed and opened the dresser's top drawer, searching for anything to line it with for makeshift storage. Her fingers found something smooth and flat pushed to the back. She pulled it free, a daguerreotype in a silver frame, face down. The image showed Carter, younger, almost smiling, with a pretty woman in Sunday dress and a boy perhaps 5 years old. Dated 3 years past. The woman's hand rested on Carter's shoulder. The boy held a wooden horse. "Leave that be." Carter stood in the doorway, arms full of yellowed sheets. His face had gone hard. The momentary gentleness vanished. Emma carefully returned the photograph face down to its hiding place. "I apologize. I was looking for linens are here." He set them on the bed with excessive care. "There's kindling by the stove downstairs. Coffee and biscuits in the kitchen. The pump out back works, but it needs priming." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Lock the doors tonight. Both of them. Sheriff Carter. Just lock them." Emma listened to his boots descend the stairs, cross the parlor, and exit through the front door. The house fell silent except for Sarah's breathing and the tick of a mantel clock somewhere below. She worked by lamplight, making the bed with sheets that smelled of cedar and thyme. The spare room became a nursery of sorts, a drawer lined with her own shawl for Sarah's bed, the 3 cloth diapers she had left arranged on the room's single chair. From the window, she could see light in the jailhouse where Carter had retreated. Downstairs, she explored the kitchen. The cast-iron stove sat cold and black, but wood filled the box beside it. The pantry held preserves in neat rows, their paper labels written in a feminine hand. Strawberry, June 1879. Pickled beets, August 1879. All dated before whatever had taken Carter's family. Sarah fussed, and Emma heated water for the baby's bottle, using the last of the milk she'd bought in Copper Creek. Tomorrow she'd need to find more. But tonight this was enough. She sat in the single kitchen chair, feeding her daughter while studying this house that felt like a tomb. The parlor drew her after Sarah settled. A pump organ stood against one wall, its keys yellowed and dusty. Sheet music, Amazing Grace. Beautiful Dreamer lay open as if someone had just finished playing. Children's primers lined a low shelf. A rag doll with yarn hair slumped in a child-sized rocking chair. Every room held stopped time. A life interrupted mid-sentence. Near midnight, she heard boot heels on pine floors not outside but below. The house had a root cellar, and Carter was pacing its length. The rhythm was steady, metronomic, like a man counting out penance. She'd heard that same measured tread in her father's house after her mother died, the sound of grief trying to walk itself into exhaustion. Emma returned to the bedroom and locked both doors as instructed. She placed Sarah in the makeshift drawer bed and lay fully clothed atop the quilt, afraid to disturb the sheets more than necessary. This was temporary shelter, nothing more. A way station between the life she'd fled and whatever came next. But as she drifted toward sleep, listening to Carter's ceaseless pacing below and Sarah's peaceful breathing beside her, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving her husband's debts and fists behind in Missouri. Not safety exactly, but its possibility. This house full of ghosts, this grieving man who'd offered shelter to strangers, perhaps broken things recognized each other in the darkness. Perhaps that recognition was enough to begin. Morning came with the smell of coffee drifting up the stairs. Emma woke disoriented, Sarah still sleeping in the drawer beside the bed. Pale sunlight filtered through lace curtains gone yellow with age. The house stood silent. No boot steps, no presence below. On the kitchen table, she found a plate covered with a clean dishcloth. Beneath it, 2 biscuits still warm from the oven, a jar of strawberry preserves with that same feminine handwriting, and a note in a different hand. Milk delivery from Widow Morgan's at 8. Coffee's hot. C. The consideration undid her momentarily. Her husband had never left breakfast, never thought to warn her of visitors. She fed Sarah with the fresh milk that arrived precisely at 8, delivered by a boy who tipped his cap and refused payment, saying the sheriff had already settled accounts. With Sarah content in a makeshift sling fashioned from her spare petticoat, Emma surveyed the house by daylight. The neglect ran deeper than dust. Windows filmed with grime, floors that hadn't seen wax in years, a stove blackened with old grease. But the bones were good solid construction, quality furnishings, a home that had once known pride. She found lye soap beneath the dry sink, a corn broom in the pantry, rags in a basket by the back door. The work felt like redemption. Each surface cleaned was a small victory against chaos, against the disorder that had driven her from Missouri. She started with the kitchen, scrubbing the table until the pine grain showed golden, scouring the stove until the iron gleamed. By 10 o'clock, she'd opened every window despite the October chill, airing out the staleness. Sarah watched from her drawer bed, now relocated to whatever room Emma worked in, occasionally offering baby commentary on her mother's efforts. The knock came as Emma was on her knees, scrubbing the parlor floor. She sat back on her heels, wiping hair from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of suds. A woman stood at the front door, round-faced and carefully dressed in brown wool with black trim. She held a wicker basket covered with checkered cloth, and her expression managed to convey both Christian charity and acute curiosity. Mrs. The woman paused deliberately, waiting. Thorne, Emma supplied, rising and smoothing her apron. Emma Thorne. Mrs. Thorne. I'm Mrs. Holloway, the minister's wife. I heard we had a visitor in town. Visitor came weighted with implications. Emma recognized the type she'd known dozens like her back home, women who dispensed judgment alongside their good works. Please, come in, Emma said, because refusing would only fuel speculation. Mrs. Holloway's eyes catalogued everything as she entered the washing bucket, the sleeping infant, the half-cleaned parlor, the absence of any male presence. You've been industrious, she said, settling uninvited on the horsehair settee. The sheriff's house has needed attention for quite some time. Since the tragedy. Emma said nothing, continuing to wring out her cleaning rag. 3 years this past August, Mrs. Holloway continued. Cholera took the boy first, then Mrs. Carter shortly after. Grief, the doctor said, but we all knew it was a broken heart. Sheriff Carter hasn't been quite right since. She set the basket on the floor, uncovering its contents with theatrical care. The Ladies' Aid Society wanted to welcome you properly. Some preserves, fresh bread, a bit of salt pork, and these. She produced several folded baby gowns, worn but clean. My own children have outgrown them. That's very kind, Emma said, recognizing the price of acceptance information. Your husband, Mrs. Holloway began, eyes sharp despite her sympathetic tone. Such a difficult thing, traveling alone with an infant. Where did you say you lost him? Emma had survived worse interrogations. Fever, she said simply. 2 months passed. In Missouri. Kansas. The lie came smooth. Let them look for records in Kansas. No family to return to. None that would have us. This was truth enough. Her father had made that clear when she'd married against his wishes. How unfortunate. Mrs. Holloway's sympathy rang hollow as a bell. And you came to Salvation Ridge because... I heard it was a lawful town. Safe for a woman alone. Indeed. Sheriff Carter runs a tight ship, though some say he's been too lenient lately, allowing drifters, taking in strays. Her eyes fixed on Emma. A man in his position must be careful about appearances. People talk. People always do. Yes. Well, a widow must be especially careful. Her reputation is all she has to trade on for survival. Mrs. Holloway stood, brushing invisible dust from her skirts. I do hope you'll join us for Sunday services once you're settled, wherever that might be. The front door opened before Emma could respond. Carter filled the doorway, his presence immediate and somehow protective. His eyes took in Mrs. Holloway, Emma's defensive posture, the charity basket with its implications. Mrs. Holloway, his tone could have frosted windows. Sheriff Carter, I was just welcoming Mrs. Thorne to our community. Were you? The minister's wife gathered herself for retreat. I'll leave the basket. Good day, Sheriff. Mrs. Thorne. Carter watched her departure from the doorway, then turned to Emma. She give you trouble? Nothing I haven't handled before. He noticed the clean floors, the opened windows, the order emerging from chaos. Something shifted in his expression. You don't have to do this, he said. I pay my debts. There is no debt. Emma wrung the rag over the bucket, water darkened with years of neglect. Then consider it rent, room and board for housekeeping. You're not a servant. No, but I'm not charity either. She met his eyes directly. I need to earn our keep. It's the only way I can stay. Carter was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Sarah chose that moment to wake, not crying, but making small sounds of discovery. May I? He gestured toward the baby. Emma nodded, surprised. Carter lifted Sarah with unexpected gentleness, his large hands careful around her small body. The baby studied him solemnly, then reached for his badge, fascinated by its shine. She has your eyes, he said, and her father's stubbornness. The words came bitter before Emma could stop them. Carter didn't probe. Instead, he carried Sarah to the window, showing her the view of the yard, where a few stubborn roses still bloomed despite the season. Here's what I propose, he said, his back to Emma. You maintain the house. Cook meals. I pay fair wages plus room and board. No charity, just employment. That's generous. It's practical. I eat at the jail or the hotel most nights. Food goes to waste here. He turned, still holding Sarah, who had grabbed his thumb with fierce baby determination. One condition. Emma waited. You stay until you're ready to leave. Not because you're scared, not because someone like Mrs. Holloway makes you feel unwelcome. You leave when you choose to, not when you're driven to. His eyes held hers. Only rule no running. Not anymore. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. He was offering more than shelter, he was offering the chance to stop being prey. I can agree to that, Emma said softly. Carter handed Sarah back, his fingers brushing Emma's in the transfer. I take supper at 6. When I take it here. Nothing fancy. I'll manage. He headed for the door, then paused. That basket from Mrs. Holloway, take what's useful. Leave the rest on the church steps tonight. They'll understand the message. After he left, Emma stood in the clean parlor holding her daughter, surrounded by the evidence of her morning's work. The house already felt different, less tomb, more possibility. She'd accepted harder bargains, made worse compromises. This one, struck in good faith between two damaged souls, felt like the first honest deal she'd made in years. Sarah gurgled, reaching for the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. Emma kissed her daughter's head and returned to her cleaning. There was work to do, a house to restore, a life to carefully rebuild. And for the first time since fleeing Missouri, she had permission to stop running. 2 weeks had passed since Emma arrived at Sheriff Carter's door, and the house had begun to breathe again. Morning light now streamed through clean windows, finding surfaces free of dust, floors that gleamed with fresh wax. The rhythms of shared living had established themselves without discussion. Carter rising before dawn to start the stove. Emma beginning breakfast as his footsteps crossed the yard to the jail, both moving through their days in a careful dance of avoided collision and mutual respect. This particular morning brought the first real frost of autumn. Emma woke to find ice crystals etched across the window glass, Sarah's breath making small clouds in the cold room. By the time she carried the baby downstairs, wrapped in both their shawls, Carter had the kitchen stove blazing and coffee brewing. "Morning," he said without looking up from the newspaper spread before him. The Salvation Ridge Weekly had become part of their routine, he'd read. She'd cook. Occasionally he'd share some piece of news that wouldn't disturb the morning's peace. "Good morning." Emma settled Sarah in the high chair Carter had retrieved from the attic 3 days prior, cleaned and repaired without fanfare. "Eggs. If you're making them." She was learning his preferences without asking. Eggs over easy. Bacon crisp but not burned. Bread toasted on the stovetop rather than in the oven. He took his coffee black and strong enough to float horseshoes, as he'd said once, making her laugh for the first time since she'd arrived. The kitchen had become her domain, but the massive cast-iron stove remained an adversary. Different from the newer model she'd used in Missouri, this one had belonged to Carter's mother, brought from Pennsylvania before the war. Its temperament was particular, its drafts unpredictable. This morning, the stove decided to be difficult. The firebox wouldn't draw properly, sending smoke billowing into the kitchen. Emma coughed, waving a dishcloth at the smoke, eyes watering. Carter stood immediately, moving around the table. "Here you have to adjust the damper just so." He reached around her to demonstrate, his chest nearly touching her back. "See quarter turn, no more. Ma used to say it was like coaxing a stubborn mule." His hands covered hers on the damper handle, guiding the adjustment. Emma became acutely aware of his presence, the smell of shaving soap, the warmth radiating from him in the cold kitchen, the careful way he maintained just enough distance to preserve propriety. "There," he said quietly. "Feel how it catches." The smoke cleared, the fire settling into a proper draw. But neither moved immediately. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken acknowledgement of something shifting between them. Sarah broke the spell with a demanding squeal for breakfast. Carter stepped back, clearing his throat. I should check on the prisoner. Tom Bradley got himself drunk again last night. Will he make trouble? Tom. No. He just needs to dry out. His wife will collect him this afternoon, same as always. Carter paused at the door. The stove takes practice. Ma spent 3 months teaching my wife. He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. She must have been patient. Emma offered carefully. She was. The words came soft. Both of them were. After he left, Emma stood before the stove, her hands still warm from where his had covered them. She'd learned more about him in these 2 weeks through silences than words. The way he always walked around the child's rocking chair, never moving it, how he'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, catching himself about to reference the past, the careful distance he maintained, as if closeness might crack something vital. By afternoon, she'd mastered the stove's temperament well enough to attempt bread. The kitchen filled with the warm scent of yeast and flour, Sarah napping in her basket near the warmth. Emma had found his mother's recipe box, written in German and English both, yellowed cards covered in careful script. Buttermilk bread, her specialty according to a note in the margin. The back door opened as she was pulling the loaves from the oven. Carter entered carrying a pail of fresh milk. His cheeks reddened from the cold. "Widow Morgan sends her regards," he said, setting the pail on the dry sink, "and a dozen eggs. Her hens are laying well despite the cold. That's kind of her. She's grateful. You helped with her fence last week." Emma had only held boards while the widow nailed. Sarah tied to her back, but the old woman had been pathetically thankful for the company as much as the assistance. Carter moved to leave, then stopped. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, coffee warming on the stove, the particular comfort of a home in use. He stood in the doorway, seeming to wrestle with something. "Would you, that is, if you're cooking anyway, might you have enough for 2 tonight?" It was the first time he'd asked rather than assumed. Emma understood the weight of the request. Meals had been functional, separate affairs. Breakfast together had become routine through proximity. But dinner was different. Dinner was a choice. "Of course," she said. 6 o'clock. He nodded and left quickly, as if he might retract the request if he lingered. Emma spent the afternoon preparing. Not elaborate, he'd been clear about nothing fancy, but with care. Pot roast with vegetables from the root cellar, the fresh bread, apple pie from the last windfalls Carson's boy had brought by. She set the table with both plates, both sets of silverware, finding a tablecloth in the bottom of a trunk, pressing it smooth with the ancient flat iron. Carter arrived exactly at 6, having clearly washed and changed from his work clothes. He'd even attempted to tame his hair with pomade, though a stubborn piece still stuck up at the crown. He stopped short seeing the table. "This isn't necessary." "It's dinner," Emma interrupted. "Civilized people eat at tables." The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." They ate in careful conversation the weather, town news, Sarah's new tooth coming in. The food disappeared with gratifying speed, Carter accepting seconds without prompting. As Emma cleared the plates, she noticed him watching Sarah, who was conducting a serious conversation with the rag doll he'd placed in her chair. "She's got opinions," he observed. "Too many, according to that doll. Takes after her mother, then." Emma turned, surprised by the gentle teasing. Carter's expression held something she hadn't seen before, not quite happiness, but its possibility. After dishes, they moved to the parlor without discussion. Emma had mending his shirts, worn at the cuffs and collar. Carter had brought a week-old newspaper from Denver. Sarah played on the rug between them, occasionally pulling herself up on the furniture before plopping back down. The lamplight created a circle of warmth against the October darkness. Emma's needle moved in steady rhythm. Carter's newspaper rustled occasionally. The clock ticked on the mantel. Sarah babbled to her doll. Then Emma heard it soft, almost inaudible. Carter was humming. The melody was familiar, an old hymn perhaps, broken and wandering. He seemed unaware he was doing it, his eyes still on the newspaper, though she doubted he was reading. The humming continued as Emma darned, as Sarah played, as the evening deepened around them. Such a small thing, a man humming without thought. But in this house that had known 3 years of silence, it rang like bells. When the clock struck 8, Carter stirred. "I should check the jail. Make sure Tom hasn't tried to dig his way out." "Of course." He stood, then paused. This was pleasant. "Yes. Perhaps we might, if you're agreeable, make it regular dinner. I mean, I'd like that." He nodded, collected his hat, and left. Emma heard him whistling, actually whistling, as he crossed the yard. She looked around the room. His newspaper left on the chair arm, her sewing basket beside the settee. Sarah's toys scattered on the rug. Small changes, barely noticeable. But together they transformed the space from preserved memorial to living home. That night, Emma heard no pacing from the cellar. Instead, she heard Carter's boots climb the stairs to his own room, heard his door close quietly. She lay in the darkness, Sarah breathing beside her, and thought about the mathematics of healing. How 2 broken halves didn't make a whole, but perhaps with time and patience and fresh bread and unconscious humming, they might make something new. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask him about his mother's other recipes. The day after, perhaps she'd oil the piano keys, see if any music remained in the old instrument. Small steps, careful progress, like coaxing a stubborn stove to draw properly. Rome wasn't built in a day, her mother used to say. Neither were second chances. But tonight, in a house no longer silent, with frost on the windows and warmth in the kitchen and a man learning to hum again, Emma felt the foundation settling into place, solid and true. Emma had avoided Main Street for 3 weeks, making do with what Carter brought home and what neighbors like Widow Morgan supplied. But this morning, Sarah needed things that couldn't be postponed: cloth for new diapers, thread for mending, medicine for her teething. The list in Emma's pocket felt heavier than the coins Carter had left on the kitchen table with deliberate casualness. She wrapped Sarah close against the November chill and stepped into the street. The walk from Carter's house to Morrison's general store covered only 3 blocks. But Emma felt eyes tracking her progress from every window. Curtains twitched. Women stopped sweeping their porches to stare. 2 men outside the barber shop ceased their conversation mid-sentence. The store's bell jangled her arrival like an announcement. Morrison's general store was the town's hub. Shelves stocked floor to ceiling, the mingled scents of coffee beans and pickles, leather and lamp oil. Glass candy jars lined the counter like jewels. Bolts of fabric formed neat towers beside sacks of flour and sugar. Morrison himself stood behind the counter, a thin man with pomaded hair and a mustache waxed to points. His welcoming smile died when he recognized her. "Help you." The words came grudging. "I need several items." Emma kept her voice steady, professional. She'd faced worse than reluctant shopkeepers. She moved through the store, Sarah quiet against her chest. Each item she selected. Morrison watched as if she might steal it. When she asked for fabric from the bolts, he unrolled it with obvious reluctance, measuring short until she pointed it out. 3 yards, Mr. Morrison, not 2 3/4. His jaw tightened, but he measured again. Emma had gathered half her list when the bell jangled again. 4 women entered in a cluster, their conversation stopping abruptly when they saw her. Emma recognized Mrs. Clayton, the banker's wife, steel gray hair, expensive dress, the kind of bearing that announced importance. The others arranged themselves behind her like soldiers. Mrs. Thorne. Mrs. Clayton made the name sound like an accusation. "We heard you were still in town." "As you see." Emma continued examining thread, though her fingers trembled slightly. "I'm surprised Sheriff Carter hasn't helped you find more appropriate accommodation." "The sheriff has been very generous." "Yes, very." The word dripped implications. "Some might say too generous. A single man, a widow under his roof. People talk. People always do." Emma selected blue thread, added it to her pile. Mrs. Clayton stepped closer. Behind her, Emma recognized Mrs. Davies, the telegraph operator's wife, and two others whose names she didn't know but whose expressions spoke volumes. "Perhaps you don't understand how things work in Salvation Ridge," Mrs. Clayton continued. "We're a respectable town. Christian. We have standards. I've noticed. Have you? Because a woman of good judgment might recognize when she's become a burden to the sheriff's reputation, to the town's moral standing." Morrison had stopped pretending to work, listening openly. Two more customers had entered but hung back, waiting for the drama to unfold. "Sheriff Carter is a pillar of this community," Mrs. Davies added. "We can't have him compromised by unfortunate associations." Emma turned to face them fully, Sarah sensing tension and beginning to fuss. "And what exactly are you suggesting? Move along." Mrs. Clayton's words came sharp as winter. "There's nothing for you here. The morning stage runs to Denver. We could even take up a collection for your fare. How Christian of you. Don't take that tone with us." The third woman, younger with pinched features, stepped forward. "We know your type, appearing from nowhere, no husband in sight, throwing yourself on the mercy of decent men." "My husband is dead." The lie came automatically. "So you say. But no one's heard of any Thomas Thorne dying of fever in Kansas." Mrs. Davies' husband checked the telegraph records. Emma's stomach dropped. They'd investigated her. "Perhaps I was mistaken about Kansas," she said carefully. "Grief confuses things." "Does it? Or are you confused about other things, like whether you were ever married at all?" The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Morrison leaned forward eagerly. Other customers pressed closer. Sarah began crying in earnest, picking up her mother's distress. "That's enough." Carter's voice cut through the store like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space. Emma hadn't heard the bell, too focused on the women surrounding her like wolves. "Sheriff Carter?" Mrs. Clayton recovered first. I heard what you were doing." He moved into the store, each step deliberate. The crowd parted before him. "Morrison, total up Mrs. Thorne's purchases." "I haven't finished," Emma said quietly. "What else do you need?" She listed the remaining items, voice barely steady. Carter selected them himself, adding things she hadn't mentioned: peppermint sticks, a length of yellow ribbon, a small mirror that would delight Sarah. Morrison totaled with obvious reluctance. "Comes to $3.40. "That's interesting." Carter's tone could have frozen hell. "By my count, it's $1.90, unless prices have doubled since yesterday." "I might have figured wrong." "You might have." Carter placed exact coins on the counter. "And Morrison, if I hear you've overcharged Mrs. Thorne again, we'll discuss it. Privately." Morrison paled, nodding quickly. Carter gathered the purchases, then did something that stopped every breath in the store. He placed his free hand on Emma's shoulder, a gesture both protective and unmistakably claiming. "Mrs. Thorne is under my protection," he said, voice carrying to every corner. "She's an employee in my household and a respectable widow raising her child with dignity despite considerable hardship. Any objection to her presence goes through me. Any insult to her character is an insult to mine. Have I made myself clear?" Silence stretched like taffy. I asked a question. "Clear, Sheriff," Morrison managed. "Ladies." Carter's gaze swept the women. "Mrs. Clayton, do you understand?" The banker's wife's face had gone mottled red. "Sheriff Carter, surely you must see how this appears. I see a group of women who should know better attacking someone who's done nothing but try to survive. I see Christians forgetting their Christ. I see citizens of my town behaving in a manner that shames us all." His hand remained on Emma's shoulder, warm and steady through her worn shawl. "Mrs. Thorne lost her husband and travels alone with an infant. Instead of offering Christian charity, you offer suspicion and cruelty. Your husbands should be ashamed. Your minister should be appalled. Mrs. Davies found her voice. We're only concerned about propriety. No, you're concerned about gossip. There's a difference. He guided Emma toward the door, maintaining that protective touch. Good day, ladies. Morrison. Outside, Emma's legs trembled. Carter kept his hand on her shoulder until they'd turned the corner onto a quieter street, then dropped it with apparent reluctance. I'm sorry, Emma began. Don't you dare apologize for their behavior. They walked in silence for a block before Emma spoke again. They're not entirely wrong. Carter stopped. Emma, my name isn't Thorne. The words tumbled out. It's Marsden. Emma Marsden. And my husband isn't dead. At least, he wasn't when I left. Carter studied her face, waiting. James was a gambler, a drunk. He lost everything: our farm, my dowry, even sold my mother's jewelry. When he started losing at cards, he'd come home and... She touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering old bruises. When he started talking about selling Sarah to pay debts, said a saloon owner in Dodge would pay well for a baby. I ran. Where is he now? I don't know. Don't care. He's probably forgotten we exist. Found another game, another bottle. They'd reached a bench beneath an old oak, and Carter guided her to sit. Sarah had quieted, fascinated by the ribbon he'd bought. So they're right, Emma continued. I'm not a respectable widow. I'm a runaway wife. You're a mother who protected her child. The law wouldn't see it that way. A husband has rights. The law isn't always just. Carter sat beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. And James Marsden has no rights here, not in my town. If he came looking. He won't. Men like that don't chase what they've already thrown away. His voice held bitter experience. But if he did, he'd find you under my protection. That wasn't just words in there. Emma felt tears threaten. Why? Why do you care what happens to us? Carter was quiet for a long moment. My wife. Margaret. She wanted to leave. After Thomas died. She wanted to go back east. Start over where there weren't memories in every corner. I refused. Said my duty was here. My job. My pride. He stared at his hands. She stayed because she had no choice. Died of grief in that house because I was too stubborn to see she was drowning. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? He turned to her. I failed her. Failed to see what she needed. Failed to put her above my own pride. I won't make that mistake again. Sarah reached for Carter's badge, gurgling happily. He let her grasp it, his large finger caught in her tiny fist. Those women will make your life miserable, Emma warned. Let them try. Something fierce entered his expression. I've been sleepwalking through this town for 3 years. Maybe it's time I woke up. They sat in companionable silence as the afternoon deepened. Emma thought about the weight of his hand on her shoulder, the way he'd said her false name like it was true, the fierceness of his protection. Thank you, she said finally. For what? For choosing us over them. Carter stood, offering his hand to help her up. That wasn't a choice, Emma. That was the easiest decision I've made in 3 years. They walked home together, packages shared between them, Sarah babbling contentedly. Behind them, Emma knew. The gossip would already be spreading like wildfire. By evening, everyone in Salvation Ridge would know that Sheriff Carter had publicly claimed the widow Thorne. Let them talk, she thought, walking beside this good man who'd stood between her and the wolves. For the first time since leaving Missouri, she had someone willing to fight for her. And perhaps, she admitted to herself as Carter held the gate for her, she'd found someone worth fighting for in return. The storm arrived without warning just past midnight. Emma woke to thunder that shook the house's foundation and lightning that turned the bedroom white as noon. But it wasn't the storm that sent ice through her veins, it was Sarah's whimpering, different from her usual fussing, weak and plaintive. Emma's hand found her daughter's forehead in the darkness, burning hot. No, no, no. The word became a prayer as she lit the lamp with shaking fingers. Sarah's face was flushed, her breathing shallow and rapid. The baby's eyes, when they opened, were glassy and unfocused. Emma gathered her daughter, blankets and all, and flew down the stairs. The kitchen still held warmth from the banked stove. She needed cool water, cloths, willow bark if Carter had any. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from another nightmare, another child, another fever that had ended in a tiny coffin. "Not again," she whispered. "Please, God, not again." Carter appeared in the doorway, suspenders over his nightshirt, hair wild from sleep. He took in the scene, Emma's panic, Sarah's lethargy, and his face went grim. "How long? I don't know. She was fine at bedtime. The storm woke me and she was burning." He crossed to them, placing a large hand on Sarah's forehead. The baby didn't respond to his touch, lost in whatever battle raged inside her small body. "She needs the doctor. In this storm the creek will be flooding. The bridge will hold or it won't." Carter was already moving, grabbing his coat from the hook. "Keep her cool but not cold. Willow bark tea in the medicine chest. Top shelf. Don't give her laudanum, no matter what." "Sam, wait." His given name slipped out unbidden. "It's too dangerous." He paused at the door, and lightning illuminated his face. "She's not going to die in my house, Emma. Not if I can help it." Then he was gone, the door slamming shut against the wind. Emma found herself alone with Sarah and the storm and memories that threatened to drown her. Another kitchen, 2 years ago. Another fever. Little James, barely 3 months old, named for his father despite everything. The cholera had taken him in 18 hours, from first fever to final breath. She'd held him as he died. Her husband passed out drunk in the next room, oblivious to their son's passing. "Not you too," she told Sarah, sponging the baby's face with cool water. "You're stronger than he was. You have to be." The medicine chest yielded willow bark, which Emma steeped into tea, diluting it heavily and spooning tiny amounts between Sarah's lips. The baby swallowed reflexively but showed no awareness. Her temperature climbed despite the cool cloths. Time stretched like molasses. The storm intensified, rain hammering the windows like fists. Emma imagined Carter trying to cross Salvation Creek, the bridge weakening under floodwaters, his horse losing footing in the mud. She might lose them both tonight, the man who'd offered sanctuary and the daughter who was her only reason for continuing. "Please." She bargained with God or fate or whatever listened in the darkness. Take anything else. Not her. Not them. An eternity passed before she heard horses in the yard. The door burst open, admitting Carter and Doc Harrington, both soaked to the skin. The doctor was a small, neat man who moved with economy despite his 60 years. His clothes were plastered to him, medical bag clutched against his chest. "How long has she been fevered?" His hands were already examining Sarah, checking her throat, listening to her chest. "Since midnight, maybe before. Any rash, vomiting? No, just the fever." Doc Harrington worked methodically, mixing powders, instructing Emma to continue the cool cloths while avoiding chilling. He produced a vial of whale oil, showing Emma how to apply it to Sarah's chest and back to draw out the fever. "It's lung fever," he announced. "Not cholera, not typhoid. Serious but survivable with proper care." Emma's knees nearly buckled with relief. Carter's hand steadied her elbow. "She'll need constant watching." The doctor continued. "Temperature control is crucial. If it spikes too high..." He didn't finish. "I'll stay until it breaks." "You don't have to," Carter began. "I do. That bridge won't survive another crossing tonight anyway." They established a rhythm. Emma applying cloths and spooning medicine. Doc Harrington monitoring Sarah's breathing. Carter maintaining the fire, heating water, fetching supplies. The storm raged on, making the house feel like a ship in rough seas. Near 3 a.m, Sarah's fever spiked. Her small body went rigid, then began to convulse. Emma screamed, a sound that came from her soul's depths. "Hold her still," Doc Harrington commanded, producing a leather bite stick. "It'll pass." But Emma was paralyzed, transported to another room, another convulsion, another child she couldn't save. She stood frozen as Sarah's body betrayed her. Carter moved instead, his large hands infinitely gentle as he steadied the baby. The seizure lasted seconds that felt like hours. Then Sarah went limp. "She's breathing," the doctor assured. "This is the crisis. Her body's fighting." Emma collapsed into a chair, tears streaming. "I can't lose her too. She's all I have left." "No!" Carter's voice was firm. He knelt beside her chair, Sarah still in his arms. "You have me." The words hung between them. Emma met his eyes, seeing her own desperation reflected there. "I lost a child," she heard herself say. "Before Sarah. A boy. Cholera took him in Kansas. 18 hours from first symptom to last breath. I held him while he died. Begged God to take me instead." Her voice broke. "My husband was drunk, didn't even wake up. I had to dig the grave myself because James had gambled away the money for a proper burial." Carter's jaw tightened. He shifted Sarah carefully, freeing one hand to grasp Emma's. "Thomas was 5, he said quietly. Bright as a new penny. Loved horses. Always begging to help at the stable." His voice grew rough. "The creek flooded that spring. He went to watch the water rise, all the children did. The bank gave way. He couldn't swim." Emma squeezed his hand, feeling the tremor in it. "I pulled him out, but it was too late. Margaret never forgave me, never forgave herself for letting him go. She just faded, stopped eating, stopped talking. Doc said it was brain fever, but I knew better. She died of a broken heart, and I let her because I didn't know how to fix it. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I was his father. I was supposed to protect him. Then I was supposed to save her, and I failed at that too." They sat in shared silence, hands clasped, Sarah between them. The storm continued its assault on the house, but inside their small circle, something else was happening. Two people who'd armored themselves in isolation were laying down their shields. "Is that why you took us in?" Emma asked. "Because you couldn't save them?" Carter considered. "Maybe at first. But now—" He looked at Sarah, whose breathing had steadied, then at Emma. "Now it's because I can't imagine this house without you in it." Doc Harrington cleared his throat. "Temperature's dropping. That's good. Keep up the cloths." They worked through the remaining darkness. Carter told stories of Thomas, his collection of rocks, his determination to train the barn cat, the songs he'd sing. Emma shared memories of baby James, the weight of him, the way he'd gripped her finger. They spoke of Margaret's garden, of James's cruelty, of dreams abandoned and futures stolen. As dawnlight crept through the windows, Sarah stirred, her eyes opened, focused and aware. She looked at Emma, at Carter, and released a small, imperious cry for food. "The fever's broken," Doc Harrington announced, but Emma had already known. She could see it in her daughter's alert gaze, the return of that stubborn life force. Emma took Sarah from Carter's arms, tears flowing freely. The baby latched onto her mother desperately, as if she too had been frightened by her journey to the edge. "Thank you," Emma said to the doctor, to Carter, to the morning itself. Carter stood stiffly, exhausted from the night's vigil, without thought. Emma rose and embraced him, Sarah between them. Not a romantic gesture, but something deeper: recognition, gratitude, shared survival. His arms came around them both, and for a moment they stood there, a tableau of grief transmuted into something that might, given time, become healing. Doc Harrington gathered his supplies, smiling slightly. "She'll need rest and careful feeding for a few days. No excitement. I'll check on her tomorrow. The bridge, Carter began, held when I crossed back. Barely, but it held. He looked between them. Sometimes barely is enough. After the doctor left, promising to send word that all was well, Carter and Emma stood in the kitchen where the night's battle had been fought. Cloths lay scattered. Medicine bottles stood open. The storm's debris littered the yard visible through the window. You should rest, Carter said. So should you. Neither moved. Sarah had fallen into peaceful sleep, her crisis past. What you said? Emma began. About not imagining the house without us. I meant it. I know. She adjusted Sarah in her arms. Sam. He waited. We're not replacements for them, for Margaret and Thomas. No, he agreed. You're not. You're something else, something I didn't think I'd find again. What's that? He considered, then offered a tired smile. A reason to come home. Emma carried Sarah upstairs, aware of Carter moving through the house below, banking the stove, securing doors the storm had rattled. Normal sounds of normal life, made precious by their nearness to loss. She settled Sarah in her drawer bed, then sat watching her daughter breathe. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and gleaming. The sun broke through the remaining clouds, filling the room with light that felt like promise. Downstairs, she heard Carter humming again, that unconscious expression of something loosening in his chest. Emma closed her eyes and let herself imagine a future where that humming became singing, where Sarah grew strong and bright, where two people who'd lost everything somehow built something new from the ruins. It was too soon for such dreams, she knew. But after a night when death had knocked and been refused entry, when two souls had unveiled their deepest wounds and found understanding instead of judgment, perhaps hope wasn't as dangerous as she'd believed. Perhaps, like Doc Harrington said, sometimes barely holding was enough. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Deputy Hutchins, who couldn't meet Carter's eyes. The town council had called an emergency meeting for that evening. Subject, the matter of current irregular domestic arrangements and their impact on community moral standards. Carter read it twice, then crumpled the paper slowly. Emma, feeding Sarah breakfast, went still. It's the formal complaint, she said. It wasn't a question. Let me guess, Clayton, Davies, and probably Judge Brennan's wife. I should leave. Today. Before this gets worse. Carter's fist hit the table hard enough to rattle dishes. No. Sam. I said no. We don't run from bullies. Emma, not in my town. It's not just about us anymore. Your position, your reputation. Mean nothing if I let them drive you out. He stood, checking his pistol out of habit, though he knew this battle wouldn't be fought with bullets. The meeting's at 7. You're coming with me. They won't want me there. That's exactly why you need to be there. Emma spent the day preparing as if for war. She pressed her best dress, the brown wool with black trim, respectable and widow appropriate. She practiced what she might say, how to hold her composure when they attacked her character. Sarah seemed to sense the tension, fussing more than usual. At 6:30, Widow Morgan appeared at the door. Heard about the meeting, she said simply. I'll watch the baby. Mrs. Morgan, you don't have to involve yourself. Child, I've lived in this town 40 years. Seen good people driven out by smaller minds too many times. Not happening again if I can help it. And the town hall occupied the second floor of the bank building, a deliberate choice that reminded everyone where the real power lay. Oil paintings of Salvation Ridge's founders glared down from wood-paneled walls. The council table sat elevated on a platform, 5 chairs behind it like thrones. Below, rows of benches were already filling with townspeople drawn by the promise of spectacle. Emma entered on Carter's arm, chin high despite the whispers that rose like buzzing wasps. They sat in the front row, directly facing the council. She recognized the players Mayor Brennan, A thin man who'd made his fortune in silver and never let anyone forget it. Banker Clayton, whose wife had confronted her at Morrison's. Judge Harrison, ancient and generally sleeping through meetings. Tom Morrison from the general store. And, surprisingly, Reverend Holloway, looking uncomfortable. Mayor Brennan gavelled the meeting to order with unnecessary force. We're here to address concerns raised by several prominent citizens regarding Sheriff Carter's domestic situation. My domestic situation is my business, Carter said, voice carrying. Not when it affects the moral fabric of our community. Clayton stood, producing a paper. I have here a petition signed by 23 citizens expressing concern about the sheriff providing shelter to a woman of questionable background and reputation. Questionable how? Carter's tone could have frozen hell. Mrs. Clayton rose from the audience. No one knows where she came from. Her story changes first Kansas, then Missouri. No marriage certificate, no proof of widowhood, and now she's living unmarried with a man sworn to uphold the law. As my employee, Carter said. Mrs. Thorne maintains my house in exchange for room and board, unless the council has outlawed employment. Don't be clever, Sheriff. Mayor Brennan leaned forward. We all know it's more than that. The woman has clearly attached herself to you for security, and you've been taken in by a pretty face and a sob story. Emma stood before Carter could respond. May I speak? This is a council meeting, not a public forum. Brennan began. Oh, let her speak. Judge Harrison had awakened, eyes bright with interest. If we're discussing her character, seems only fair she gets to defend it. Emma moved forward, aware of every eye upon her. My name is Emma Thorne. My husband died of fever 5 months ago, leaving me with an infant and debts I couldn't pay. I came to Salvation Ridge because I heard it was a lawful town where a woman alone might find honest work. Convenient that no one can verify your husband's death. Mrs. Davies called out. Emma turned to face her. Would you like me to describe what a man looks like dying of fever? The way his skin burns until you can't touch it. The delirium where he doesn't recognize his own child. The sound of his last breath rattling in his chest. Her voice grew stronger. I buried him myself because there was no money for a proper funeral. I sold everything we owned for stage fare here. If that makes me questionable, so be it. Yet you moved into the sheriff's house immediately, Clayton pressed. After Sheriff Carter found me at the town gates with a sick child and no money. Yes, he offered shelter, Christian charity. I believe it's called. Christian charity doesn't require living under the same roof. It does when there's nowhere else to go. Or would you have preferred he left us to freeze? Carter stood, moving beside her. Enough. Mrs. Thorne has worked honestly since arriving. She's transformed my house from a tomb into a home. She's helped neighbors, attended church, conducted herself with complete propriety. What more do you want? We want her gone. Mayor Brennan's words fell like stones. The appearance of impropriety is as damaging as impropriety itself. A sheriff must be above reproach. Above reproach. Carter laughed bitterly. Where was this concern for propriety when Judge Harrison was keeping that saloon girl? Where was it when Clayton here foreclosed on the widow Allen, knowing she had nowhere to go? That's different. It's not. Carter's voice rose. You're attacking Emma because she's vulnerable, because she can't fight back, because it makes you feel righteous to kick someone who's already down. Sheriff Carter, Reverend Holloway spoke for the first time. Surely you must see how this looks. A man in your position, a man in my position, has spent 3 years dead inside. The admission silenced the room. My wife and son died, and I died with them. Went through the motions, did my job, but I was a walking corpse. Then Emma arrived, and slowly, carefully, she brought life back into my house. Sarah's laughter filled rooms that had been silent too long. Emma's cooking replaced the nothing I'd been surviving on. For the first time in 3 years, I have a reason to come home. That's all very touching, Mayor Brennan said. But emotions don't change facts. Either she leaves, or... Carter reached up and unpinned his badge. The silver star caught the lamplight as he set it on the council table with deliberate precision. Or what, you'll fire me? He looked at each council member. Go ahead, fire me. Find another sheriff. Someone who'll face down drunk cowboys and armed thieves for $40 a month. Someone who'll keep the peace between miners and ranchers, who'll track rustlers through blizzards, who'll stand between this town and chaos. He paused. Good luck with that. The silence stretched taut. The council exchanged uncertain glances. They'd expected him to fold, not call their bluff. Then Doc Harrington stood in the audience. I'd like to speak to Mrs. Thorne's character. This isn't a trial, Brennan started. No, could have fooled me. The doctor moved forward. 2 weeks ago, this woman sat up all night with a fevered child, never complaining, never panicking even when death knocked. She showed more strength and grace in those hours than I've seen from most. She's a devoted mother doing her best in impossible circumstances. She's also kind. Widow Morgan had entered, leaving Sarah with someone. Help me with my fence, visits when I'm poorly, never asks for anything in return. That's more Christian than most wearing the name. The woman makes my Sam human again. This from Tom Bradley, the town drunk, sober for once. Used to. He'd just lock me up to dry out. Now he talks to me, tries to help. That's her influence. More voices rose from the crowd. Mrs. Holloway's clear tone cut through. Perhaps we've been hasty. The sheriff's right, we've shown no charity. Her husband looked at her in surprise, then nodded slowly. Judge not lest ye be judged. Perhaps we should remember that. Mayor Brennan's face had gone red. This is about maintaining standards. This is about control. Carter picked up his badge but didn't pin it back on. About small people trying to feel big by stepping on someone defenseless. But Emma's not defenseless. She has me. And apparently, she has others who recognize decency when they see it. Clayton stood. Sheriff, be reasonable. Your position requires. My position requires I uphold the law. Last I checked. There's no law against kindness, employment, or second chances. If this council wants to make new laws, put it to a vote. Let the whole town decide if we're the kind of place that throws out widows and babies. That won't be necessary. Judge Harrison was fully awake now, seemingly energized by the drama. Motion to table this matter indefinitely. All in favor. Reverend Holloway's hand went up immediately. After a long moment, Morrison raised his. Judge Harrison added his own. Motion carries. The old judge smiled. Sheriff, I believe you have evening rounds to make. Carter looked at the badge in his hand, then slowly pinned it back on. Emma. She took his offered arm, legs shaky but holding. They walked through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea. Some faces showed hostility, but others more than she'd expected showed respect, even approval. Outside, the evening air felt cool and clean after the stifling hall. They walked in silence until they reached the oak tree where they'd sat after the confrontation at Morrison's. You didn't have to do that, Emma said softly. Yes, I did. He turned to her. Emma, I meant what I said in there. Every word. They'll never fully accept me. They'll learn to, or they'll answer to me. He touched her face gently. You're not alone anymore. You have me and apparently half the town. The other half wants me gone. The other half can go to hell. Despite everything, Emma laughed. Sheriff Carter, such language. Sam, he corrected. After tonight, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. They stood there as stars began appearing overhead. Two people who'd faced down the town's judgment and survived. It wasn't over. Emma knew the Mrs. Claytons of the world didn't give up easily. But tonight, something had shifted. Carter had chosen her publicly, definitively, and others had stood with them. We should get back, she said. Sarah will be wanting her supper. In a moment. Sam's arm came around her shoulders, protective and warm. I want to remember this. The night you almost lost your job. The night I realized what actually matters. They stood together watching the stars emerge, while behind them the town hall slowly emptied. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they'd won something precious, the right to choose their own path, together, inside the town hall. Mayor Brennan stared at the spot where Carter's badge had lain. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Judge Harrison said, gathering his coat. That man would die for this town, and we all know it. But he'd live for that woman. Sometimes. Brennan, it's better to recognize when you're beaten. The mayor said nothing, but his expression promised this battle might be won, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. A month had passed since the council meeting, and Salvation Ridge had settled into an uneasy peace. The open hostility had faded to whispered disapproval, then to watching silence. Emma moved through town with her head high, Sarah on her hip, conducting business at Morrison's without incident. The man had even started greeting her properly, though his smile never reached his eyes. But beneath the surface calm, something else simmered, an unspoken tension between Emma and Sam that grew stronger each day. They maintained their careful routine breakfast together, him to the jail, her to household tasks, dinner by lamplight, evening conversations that stretched later each night. Yet both knew they stood at a crossroads, unable to move backward, afraid to step forward. This particular morning dawned crisp and bright, December frost painting the windows with crystalline patterns. Emma came downstairs to find the kitchen empty, coffee made but Sam absent. Through the window, she saw him in the side garden, doing something she couldn't quite make out. She bundled Sarah in woolens and stepped outside. Sam knelt beside the garden bed that had lain dormant since she'd arrived, carefully placing something in freshly turned earth despite the winter season. Sam, what are you doing? He looked up, dirt on his hands, an expression on his face she'd never seen before, something between determination and vulnerability. Planting roses. He indicated the cuttings beside him. They won't bloom until spring, but they need to go in now, root over winter. Emma moved closer, recognizing the variety. Yellow roses, like the ones in the photograph. Margaret loved them. Brought cuttings from her mother's garden in Ohio. He continued working, not meeting her eyes. After she died, I let them die too. Seemed fitting somehow. Why plant them now? Sam sat back on his heels, finally looking at her. House needs beauty again. Life. Growing things. He paused. You brought that. Seemed right to bring the roses back too. Emma's throat tightened. She understood what he was saying beneath the words, not replacing but renewal, not forgetting but moving forward. They're lovely, she managed. Margaret would have liked you. The words came sudden and sure. You're both stubborn, both stronger than you think, both able to make an empty house feel like home. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. I thought I'd visit the cemetery later. Would you and Sarah come? I'd like to tell them about you. Emma's heart clenched. Are you sure? More sure than I've been about anything in 3 years. Gayo. That afternoon, they walked to the cemetery on the hill overlooking town. Sarah rode in Sam's arms, fascinated by his badge and babbling her version of conversation. The graveyard was small, bordered by iron fence, stones ranging from elaborate marble to simple wooden crosses. Sam led them to a corner beneath an old cottonwood. 2 stones stood side by side. Margaret Catherine Carter, beloved wife and mother, 1846 to 1880, and Thomas Samuel Carter, our angel, 1875 to 1880. Sam stood quietly for a moment, then spoke as if continuing a long conversation. Meg, this is Emma. She's living in the house now, with her daughter Sarah. Emma's gotten the stove to behave, you'd be impressed. And Sarah's turned your sewing room into a nursery. There's laughter again. Meg, you always said the house needed laughter. He shifted to the smaller stone. Thomas, Sarah would have loved you. She's got your curiosity into everything. Fearless like you were. His voice roughened. I think you would have protected her, been the big brother she needs. Emma touched his arm gently. Sam covered her hand with his, and they stood there in peaceful silence, Sarah making soft sounds that seemed like her own form of greeting. She'd want me living, not just existing, Sam said finally. Meg was practical that way. Would have boxed my ears for moping this long. They walked back slowly, Sarah drowsing in the afternoon sun. As they approached the house, Emma's steps faltered. On the porch sat her carpet bag, the one she'd arrived with, now mended and cleaned. Sam stopped short. Emma. She couldn't meet his eyes. I packed this morning, before I saw you in the garden. Why? Because I'm a coward. The words tumbled out. Because I feel things I shouldn't. Because every day I stay makes leaving harder, and I will have to leave eventually. Why? Sam, be practical. I'm still married in the eyes of the law. You're the sheriff. Your position. To hell with my position. You don't mean that, don't I? He set Sarah down on the porch, the baby protesting sleepily. Then he turned to Emma, taking both her hands. What if I do mean it? What if you matter more than the job, the town, any of it? You're talking nonsense. I'm talking sense for the first time in years. His grip tightened. Emma, I've been dead inside so long I'd forgotten what living felt like. Then you arrived with your courage and your dignity and your refusal to give up. You made me remember who I used to be, who I could be again. Sam, I love you. The words hung between them like a physical presence, not as a replacement for Margaret, not as convenience or propriety. I love you. Emma Marsden or Thorne or whoever you choose to be. I love how you hum when you cook. I love how you face down the town gossips. I love how you've made my tomb of a house into a home. I love Sarah like she was my own. Emma's tears came freely now. I can't give you what you deserve. A proper wife. Legitimate marriage. I'm not asking for proper or legitimate. I'm asking for you. He released her hands and reached into his pocket, producing something that caught the dying sunlight. His mother's ring. A simple gold band with a small sapphire, worn smooth by years of use. This was my mother's, then Margaret's. It's been in my bureau drawer for 3 years, waiting. He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, carpet bag forgotten beside them. Emma, I'm not asking you to forget him or pretend the past didn't happen. I'm asking you to choose me. Choose us. Choose the future we could build together. Sam, I'm still legally married. There are ways. Abandonment. Failure to provide any judge would grant it. Judge Harrison already offered to help. Quietly. He stayed on his knee, ring extended. I'm not asking you to marry me today or tomorrow. I'm asking you to say yes to the possibility. To stop running. To let me court you properly while we sort the legal matters. Emma looked at him kneeling there, this good man who'd sheltered them, protected them, chosen them over everything else. She thought of the roses he'd planted, the graves he'd visited, the badge he'd been willing to surrender. The town will never accept it. The town will learn to, or they'll find another sheriff. You love this job. I love you more. Sam, Emma, please, just say yes. She looked at Sarah, sitting on the porch playing with the carpetbag's clasp. Her daughter would grow up with a father who'd chosen her, who'd protect her, who'd love her freely. She'd have stability, safety, a name that meant something in this town. But more than that, Emma realized she wanted this for herself. She wanted the man who hummed in the kitchen, who held Sarah like precious glass, who'd face down the entire town for them. She wanted the chance to love without fear, to build something lasting on ground that wouldn't shift beneath her feet. Yes, she whispered. Sam's face transformed. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Not a desperate embrace, but something solid and sure. A promise made physical. Sarah chose that moment to voice her opinion with a delighted squeal. "I think she approves," Sam laughed, scooping the baby up to include her in their circle. "What happens now?" Emma asked, overwhelmed by the speed of change. "Now we court properly. You stay in the main bedroom, I stay in mine. We observe proprieties until the legal matters are resolved. Then, when you're free, we marry in the church with the whole town watching. They'll make it difficult. Let them try." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "We've faced worse and survived." The next morning, they attended church together as always. But something had changed. Emma wore the ring on her right hand, not yet a wedding band, but a promise. Sam's hand rested on the pew back behind her, protective and claiming. Reverend Holloway's eyes widened seeing the ring. Then his face broke into a genuine smile. His sermon that morning focused on redemption and second chances, on God's mysterious ways of bringing healing to broken hearts. After the service, Mrs. Holloway approached them. "Emma, that's a lovely ring." "Thank you." It was Sam's mother's. The minister's wife studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Good. It's about time." She raised her voice slightly. "Sheriff Carter, when you're ready to post bans, my husband would be honored to perform the ceremony." The announcement rippled through the gathered congregation. Some faces showed disapproval, but more showed curiosity, even approval. Doc Harrington clapped Sam on the shoulder. Widow Morgan hugged Emma. Even Morrison nodded grudgingly. A man had the right to choose his wife. After all, Mrs. Clayton pushed forward, face pinched with displeasure. "Sheriff, surely you're not serious. Completely serious." "Mrs. Clayton," Sam's voice carried clearly, "I intend to marry Emma as soon as legal matters are resolved. We'd be honored by your attendance at the wedding, though we'll understand if you decline." The banker's wife stood speechless, robbed of her power by their openness. There could be no scandal in announced intentions, no whispers about impropriety when everything was public. As they walked home, Sarah riding on Sam's shoulders, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope without reservation. The roses Sam had planted would bloom come spring. By then, she'd be free of the past, able to marry the man beside her. "No regrets?" Sam asked, catching her expression. "None." She took his free hand. "For the first time in my life, absolutely none, Lee." And they entered the house together, afternoon light streaming through clean windows, illuminating a space that had transformed from monument to grief into promise of future. The carpet bag, still packed, sat forgotten in the corner. Tomorrow Emma would unpack it for the last time, hanging her few dresses beside the clothes that had belonged to another woman who'd loved this complicated, honorable man. But today, she sat at the piano Sam had mentioned his mother playing, running her fingers over keys that hadn't made music in 3 years. She picked out a simple melody, rusty but determined. Sam stood behind her, Sarah in his arms, and together they filled the house with something it had lacked for too long, the sound of a family being born. Through the window, barely visible in the frozen earth, the first green shoots of roses pushed through the soil, reaching for spring. The wedding took place on a Wednesday morning in March, just as the roses Sam had planted showed their first buds. The parlor had been transformed with spring wildflowers. Widow Morgan gathered at dawn, their delicate blues and yellows brightening the room where grief had lived so long. Emma stood before the mirror in the bedroom, adjusting the dress she'd remade from her mother's wedding gown, cream silk turned practical brown, but with the original lace collar preserved, a connection to happier times. "You look beautiful," Widow Morgan said, pinning the last curl into place. "Sam won't know what hit him." Through the window, Emma could see Doc Harrington and Reverend Holloway arriving, their wives carrying covered dishes for the wedding breakfast. The ceremony would be small, just witnesses and a few friends, but after everything they'd endured, Emma wanted nothing more. The legal matters had resolved with surprising swiftness. Judge Harrison, true to his word, had handled the abandonment petition quietly. James Marsden had been gone over 18 months with no word or support grounds enough in territorial law. The decree had arrived 2 weeks ago, freeing Emma to marry properly. Sarah, now 14 months old and walking everywhere, toddled over in her new dress, pink calico with tiny pearl buttons that she kept trying to eat. "Mama pretty," she announced, her vocabulary expanding daily under Sam's patient teaching. "Thank you, sweet girl." Emma lifted her daughter, careful not to wrinkle either of their dresses. "Ready to get a papa?" "Papa," Sarah clapped, though Emma suspected she didn't fully understand. She'd been calling Sam Papa for weeks already, much to his delight. A knock came at the door. "Emma!" Sam's voice, carefully formal. "Reverend Holloway says we're ready when you are. Against tradition for you to see me before. When have we ever followed tradition?" Emma laughed, opening the door. Sam stood in his Sunday suit, hair slicked back, an expression of wonder on his face that made her heart race. He'd seen her every day for months, but something about this moment, the dress, the occasion, the promise about to be made transformed familiar into magical. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself. Sheriff," he offered his arm. "Shall we go get married? Mrs. Soon-to-be Carter." The ceremony was brief but perfect. Reverend Holloway spoke about redemption and second chances, about God's mysterious timing. Sam's hands shook slightly as he slipped his mother's ring from Emma's right hand to her left. Emma's voice caught as she promised to honor and cherish, in sickness and health, until death parted them. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Holloway announced with obvious pleasure. Sam cupped Emma's face gently, as if she might disappear. The kiss was soft, reverent, a seal on promises made. Sarah, in Widow Morgan's arms, applauded enthusiastically. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Holloway said, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Carter." The wedding breakfast filled the dining room with laughter and warmth. Mrs. Holloway's cake 3 layers with buttercream frosting stood as centerpiece. Doc Harrington produced a camera, insisting on a photograph despite the expense. "Someday, Sarah will want to see this," he said, positioning them before the fireplace. They stood together. Sam seated with Emma beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Sarah on Emma's lap. The magnesium flash exploded, capturing forever a moment of perfect happiness, 3 souls who'd found each other in loss, creating something new from sorrow's ashes. 3 months later, summer had transformed Salvation Ridge. The roses Sam planted bloomed in profusion, yellow petals bright against the white house. The garden Emma started overflowed with vegetables, tomatoes, beans, squash enough to share with neighbors. The windows stood open to catch evening breezes. Curtains Emma had sewn dancing in the wind. Inside, the transformation was complete. No longer a monument to grief. The house hummed with life. Sam's laughter came easier now, full and rich. Emma's cooking filled the kitchen with scents of bread and preserves, laid up for winter. Sarah's toys scattered everywhere despite Emma's attempts at order, evidence of a cherished child. This particular evening, Sam was teaching Emma to shoot behind the house, not because she needed protection, the town had largely accepted them now, but because he wanted her confident, capable. "Steady," he said, standing behind her, adjusting her grip on the Colt 45. "Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze gentle." Emma fired, the bottle exploding on the fence post. "Ha! Natural talent." Sam grinned. "Though I prefer you armed with a rolling pin. Remember Morrison's face when you went after him for shortchanging Widow Morgan? He deserved it." "Absolutely." He took the gun, checking it before holstering. "Speaking of town, Mayor Brennan asked if you'd consider teaching at the school come fall, official-like, with pay." Emma had been conducting informal lessons in their parlor for neighborhood children whose parents couldn't afford the regular school. Word had spread about her patience and skill with letters. He's trying to make amends, she said. Maybe. Or maybe he recognizes talent when he sees it. You've got half the children in town reading better already. They walked back to the house hand in hand, discussing the possibility. As they reached the porch, Sam stopped suddenly. I forgot. Letter came for you today. Emma's stomach clenched. Letters meant news, usually bad. Sam produced the envelope from his pocket, postmarked Kansas City. She opened it with trembling fingers, read quickly, then sank onto the porch step. Emma, what is it? She handed him the letter wordlessly. Sam read aloud, Mrs. Marsden. I regret to inform you that your husband, James Marsden, was killed in a saloon dispute in Dodge City 4 months past. His effects, such as they were, have been sold to pay burial costs. The marriage dissolution you sought is therefore unnecessary. Please accept my condolences. Signed, Attorney William Fitch. 4 months, Emma said quietly. He's been dead 4 months. How do you feel? Emma considered. Free, truly free, and sad, somehow. Not for him, but for who he might have been if drink and cards hadn't owned him. Sam sat beside her, pulling her close. It doesn't change anything for us. No, she agreed. We're already married in every way that matters. Mama, Papa. They turned to see Sarah standing at the door, having escaped her nap. She toddled onto the porch, still unsteady but determined. Then, in a moment that stopped both their hearts, she let go of the doorframe and took 3 wobbling steps to Sam. Papa, she announced triumphantly as he caught her. Did you see that? Sam's voice was thick with emotion. She walked to me. Emma laughed through tears. Of course she did. You're her papa. The town harvest festival arrived with September's cooling weather. Emma had volunteered to organize the church booth, selling preserves and baked goods for the school fund. The whole town turned out farmers, ranchers, townspeople mingling in rare harmony. Mrs. Carter, a young voice called. Timothy Morrison, the storekeeper's son and one of Emma's students, ran up waving a paper. Look, I got perfect marks on my letters. That's wonderful. Timothy. Morrison himself approached, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Carter, fine day for the festival. Indeed it is, Mr. Morrison. He shifted his weight. Timothy's improved considerable since you started teaching him. His mother and I are grateful. It was the closest to an apology she'd get, and Emma accepted it graciously. He's a bright boy, a pleasure to teach. So you see. As the day wore on, Emma noticed how naturally she and Sam moved through the crowd as a unit. His hand found the small of her back in crowds. She automatically checked his coffee was how he liked it. Sarah rode his shoulders like a queen surveying her kingdom, calling greetings to everyone. Mrs. Clayton approached as Emma was packing up the booth. The banker's wife had aged in the past months, her husband's failed speculation having cost them dearly. Mrs. Carter, she said stiffly. The preserves were excellent. Thank you. The woman hesitated, then spoke quickly. I was wrong. About you. You've been good for the sheriff. Good for the town. Before Emma could respond, she hurried away. Sam appeared at Emma's elbow. Was that an apology? I think it was. Will wonders never cease? He helped her pack the remaining goods. Ready to go home. Home. The word that had once meant fear and pain now meant safety and love. Yes. That evening, after Sarah was asleep in her proper bedroom, the sewing room converted with Sam's handiwork, Emma and Sam settled into their routine. He sat in his chair, reading aloud from the Denver paper. Emma worked on a quilt, each square telling part of their story fabric from her arrival dress, Sam's old shirt, Sarah's outgrown baby gown. Says here they're building a new railway spur. Sam read, might come through Salvation Ridge. That'll change things. Everything changes. He set the paper aside. Question is whether we guide the change or let it run us over. Emma smiled. Spoken like a sheriff. Spoken like a man who's learned a thing or two about adapting. Sarah cried out a nightmare. Probably. Both rose automatically, but Sam waved Emma back. I'll go. She listened to him climb the stairs, his low voice soothing their daughter. Through the window, she could see Sam's roses blooming in the moonlight, stronger for having survived the winter. Like them. Like all of them. Sam returned, carrying Sarah, who'd refused to go back to sleep. Someone wants a story, he said. They settled on the sofa, Sarah between them. And Sam began the tale of a brave princess and her beautiful mother who'd slayed dragons and won a kingdom. Emma added details, Sarah contributing excited babble at dramatic moments. The clock ticked toward bedtime, but none of them moved, held in the circle of lamplight and love. We three lost souls made one whole family, Emma murmured, watching Sarah's eyes finally droop. The best kind, Sam agreed. The kind that chooses each other. Later, after Sarah was finally asleep and the house quiet, Emma stood at their bedroom window looking out at the town below. Lights glowed in windows, families settling for the night. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, it always did. But tonight, in a house that had known such sorrow and now held such joy, Emma Carter allowed herself to believe in happily ever after. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind built on courage and choice, on second chances and stubborn hope. The kind where broken people helped each other heal. The kind where love wasn't just a feeling, but a daily decision to stay, to build, to believe. Sam's arms came around her from behind, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. No regrets, he asked, as he did sometimes. None, she answered, as she always did. This is exactly where I belong. And it was. In a house with roses blooming, a child sleeping peacefully, and a good man's arms around her. In a town that had learned to accept them. In a life rebuilt from ashes into something beautiful and strong and true. The sheriff had given them shelter. They had given each other home. Sometimes the greatest injustice isn't what the law says, but what people assume. Emma arrived at Salvation Ridge with nothing but desperation and a sick child, only to be labeled a vagrant, a woman of questionable character, a threat to moral standards. The town saw her poverty and made it a crime. They saw her acceptance of shelter and called it impropriety. But this story reminds us that family isn't just blood, it's choice. Sam chose to see Emma's courage instead of her circumstances. He chose to risk his reputation, his position, even his badge, rather than let injustice stand. And in choosing her, he found what he'd thought lost forever: purpose, love, a reason to come home. Gratitude, too, takes many forms. Emma's gratitude transformed a house of grief into a home of hope. The town's eventual gratitude for her teaching, her kindness, her strength, came only after they nearly destroyed her. How often do we mistake suffering for unworthiness? How often do we judge those seeking shelter instead of offering it? Have you ever faced judgment for accepting help when you desperately needed it? When surviving itself was seen as somehow shameful? Share your story below.